Here with a new episode of Chordplay, and this is part 2 of the Chords of Robin Trower, and it was 4 or 5 years ago when I made part 1, and there was a lot of music in that episode, from Bridge of Sighs, Robin's historic album. This lesson is going to focus on music from his album For Earth Below, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. Robin also released, his, 28th studio album this year. So it's definitely been a busy year for Mr. Trower. His career started in 1962. He was a member of the band Procol Harum from 1967 until 1971. And then from 74 to 77, he released some very famous solo albums, very well received and very popular. Definitely a dynamite guitarist, and him, along with the late great James DeWar, definitely reshaped and kind of refocused blues rock and rock music in the 70s and beyond. A legend. So like I just mentioned, this has been a really busy year for Robin Trower. He released his 28th studio album back in May, Come and Find Me, and he's been on tour. And I was looking forward to a stop on his tour that's kind of close to me. That was in September, but unfortunately those tour dates have been canceled. I think Robin's having some kind of undisclosed health issues. I hope he's okay. Him and his music's definitely been on my mind a lot this year. I think I made a 3-for-all like a month or 2 ago for Robin, and here I am doing part 2 of a chord play. But definitely it's because he's been very active, and he's over 80 years old and still rocking the streets. That's awesome. So the chord-based and rhythm guitar parts in this episode basically all came from Robin's album For Earth Below, which I mentioned earlier is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. There is one additional example at the end of this lesson that's kind of a surprise, and I'm going to save that until we get there. But the first 6 examples all came from Robin's, classic album For Earth Below. It does seem like, Bridge of Sighs is the Robin Trower, album to check out. But you definitely should listen to his other albums from the 70s and beyond. There's some great music all over, his discography. So anyway, that's the bulk of where, the music in this episode came from. The opening, that was the song Shame the Devil from Robin's album For Earth Below. That's the first song on the album, the first thing you hear. And you're also going to hear all the effects that Robin typically likes to put on his guitar. Uni-Vibe and vibrato effects, wah and fuzz and all kinds of stuff. And I'm actually using the Kemper Profiler player, and I'm on the Hendrix setting or patch. And then I added a vibrato. I think it's the harmonic vibrato, the big one or something like that, the mellow one, whatever. But there's the effect. That kind of, modulation effect or whatever. Very kind of Trowery for sure. It was close enough for my ears. I was like, yeah, that sounds like Trower. And it's something like this. like that. So we're in B minor right there, and he's kind of grabbing like a thumb wrapped B minor 7. Like that. So I'm using, my index finger for that 7th fret bar, also using my thumb for that 7th fret, B note. And you're going to kind of do like this root note, scratch, root note, and then slide the top part of that chord. Like that. And then you're going to go back to that root note, grab that 7th fret, and then you're going to do a trill right there between that D and E. Like that. Definitely Robin loves doing trills like that. Do that 3 times, then you got this little fill. Like that. And go right back into that chord riff. Right there the verse technically starts, and he goes to G after that B minor riff. Like a single G note, slide this G to A, and then you're kind of going back and forth between that G and A, and it's just single notes. And then right there, a low E open, and you're sliding these double stops like the 7th and the 9th. Like that. Very bluesy and syrupy with the effects. Now you want to do that riff 3 times during the verse. Change right here, B minor 7. This is really crafty. He's basically moving into like an implied F sharp 7 right there. And then, right, then he moves into a G7 right there. And then he does a similar thing in E7. Grab the root, and then that G to G sharp. So that change right there, let's see, when you get back to that partial E7, then you got this kind of bluesy walk up. Like that. And then a really cool like double stop bend, which Robin loves doing that too, and then goes right back to that main riff. Cool song right there. Next up's the opening of the song It's Only Money from the album For Earth Below, and this is really short and sweet, but it's really cool, like this. So it's really just a big glorified E minor 7 right there, and you hear the low E first, and then you hear him rake or strum that chord backward, and it's real slow. Like that. And then, and you're literally just grabbing that G and D and then hammering onto that A note right there on the D string. Right? And go right back to that glorified E minor 7. Next up's the main riff from Confessin Midnight from the album For Earth Below, and this is really cool, like this. Something like that. It's really cool, real Hendrixy, real syrupy with the effects, a lot of wah action kind of going on there. But we're basically in E, and you're doing these kind of partial, like two note partial chords on the G and the B string there. That partial E, and then you're kind of moving it up to like an implied like E minor 7 with that G and that D note. So you're doing, and then, right? So you're doing these partial chords and then you're answering it with different fills after, like that. And then the second time, just stay on that B and E. And then you're going to slide a double stop 12 to 14 on the G and the B string, like that. Do the first one again with the 2 chord hits there, the same fill, and then this time do 2 hits on that G and E, and then you're coming down, you know, that D to B, and then that A to G to that E. Then you basically start it again. Last time right there, you're going to do 1 hit on that B and E, and then you go into this E minor pentatonic lick right there. And Robin just coasts right through the rhythm right there, the timing just kind of floats right over the top of it, and then magically goes right back on the 1 again. Something like that, really cool. Next up's the main riff from the song Alethea from the album For Earth Below, and once again this has some of Robin's, you know, trademark trills in action like this. Something like that. So now we're in C sharp minor, and once again we're doing this kind of thumb wrap right there, you know, grabbing the root note with your thumb and then that kind of partial chord there with your index finger, and now we're trilling between the minor and major third right there, right? So he's doing root and then trill, and then you've got power chords right there, that E5, so it's E5 to E flat 5, right there, B flat, B to C, walking up, and we're walking up right back into C sharp minor again. Now the second time you're doing the trill on that C sharp minor, 2 hits on that E5, and then there's 2 like quick hits here, that E5 to E flat 5, and then B5 to C5, like that. Then you just basically repeat that whole riff again. Next up's the opening riff from the song A Tale Untold from the album For Earth Below, and this is really just 2 implied partial chords being picked through, and you're letting the notes kind of ring, something like this. You're also letting the effect, this kind of vibrato, kind of swirly effect, kind of take control too, like this. It's really just 2 implied chords, like I said, and it's implied C sharp minor 7 right there, and then just move everything over a set of strings, and now it's a G sharp minor 7 implied right there, right? And then he's starting with that hammer on from B to C sharp, and you start picking through that C sharp minor 7 chord, like that. Hop everything over, and then do the same thing, kind of pick through G sharp minor 7 like that. Just looping those 2 chords over and over like this. sweet, really easy, but that's a cool guitar part. Next up's the title track for Earth Below from the album by the same name, and this is really slow. I always end up rushing this part because it is very slow. Something like this. Continues to add different fills and licks and stuff. I just want to kind of show like the basics here. It's really just, once again, 2 chords moving back and forth. And he's grabbing single notes in the beginning, that A, C to D. Like that. And then just strum a D minor 7 right there and let it ring. And you hear all the swirly, you know, vibrato effects and stuff. And then he's doing that, a double stop 7 on the D and the G, move that 10th fret to the 12th fret, you know, double stop. And then right there, you know, it's that that F and that A note, and you're hammering on that G and C and back, like that. So that's kind of like the D fill. And then it goes to A minor right there, strum the root note and then strum the chord. And then it's double stops again. So right there he's grabbing a C and an E, and then he moves it to a G and a C and slides it back and forth. Like that, and end on that A and D up there. And then he goes right back to D and D minor 7. And eventually you start hearing those kind of Hendrixy R&B. And then you hear like A minor, a similar thing. And he keeps adding like, you know, licks and fills and stuff in there. That's a really cool song. And once again, it's got this dreamlike kind of, you know, atmospheric sound. Really cool. Okay, last but not least is the song What It Is. This came from the album B.L.T. That's Jack Bruce on bass and vocals, Bill Lordan on drums, and of course Robin Trower on guitar. That's a killer album. And actually Jack Bruce and Robin Trower cut 3 albums together. B.L.T's from 1981. And what it is this kind of funky groove like this. Something like that. So we're basically in D, and this first part, we're basically playing like this partial, you know, D7, and then that's going to change to this G7 over D, like that. So I love the little mutated chord twist there, to there. You know what I mean? And then single notes down there, that B, C to D to that F, and then double stops up here, like that, and we've got that. And it definitely has a groove to it, right? Change. Just start driving that D7, then that G7 over D right there, and then it's C7 back there. Just kind of thump it once. I mean, it's kind of funky C to C sharp, and you're kind of walking back into that D, right? Going to that D7, and there's a fill, like that. So one more time through that part. song, and B.L.T is a cool album too. Check it out. All right, that's going to wrap this episode of Chord Play with part 2 of the Chords of Robin Trower. Definitely, I'm a huge Trower fan. Definitely, as the years kind of roll on and I get older and older, I just appreciate his music and albums more and more. I have a huge Robin Trower like vinyl stash, and I have some of his albums on CD too. So I'm definitely a big fan, and I'm really just putting this together, even though I did do a 3-for-all about a month ago surrounding Robin. Now we're hitting part 2, of his chords. And it's really just because I've been listening to him and thinking about him. And like I mentioned back at the beginning of this lesson, I was really pumped because he was coming to my area on his tour. I think that was in September. And I was really bummed that he canceled. But then I also noticed the reason why. He was having some medical issues. So I hope Robin's okay. I'm a huge fan. I can wait, for a concert. I just want to make sure that he's healthy and he's doing okay. And that's kind of why I put this together, because I've definitely been thinking about him and jamming his music. And then when I noticed it was the 50th anniversary year for Earth Below, I just jumped on it. I was like, all right, we haven't looked at music from that album. I've been listening to it like crazy. Killer album, totally overlooked. Definitely Robin has a lot more than Bridge of Sighs, even though Bridge of Sighs is the one in my opinion. But Robin Trower has a lot of great albums. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to my lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.